Welcome to sleepy Japan. Tonight, we drift together into a quiet story from Japan, a tale shaped by stillness, tradition, and the soft rhythm of night. Before we begin, take a slow breath in and exhale gently. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your hands rest. Let your thoughts begin to settle as the world around you softens into calm. Imagine a peaceful evening, light from a simple paper lantern drifting across the room, a cool breeze moving just beyond the window. And in the distance, a single temple bell echoing through the night. Each sound carries you deeper into rest. There is nothing you need to do now, nowhere you need to be. Just breathe and let the night open gently around you. Feel peace moving through your body, from your chest to your shoulders, to the quiet rhythm of your breath. The world outside grows silent. Only the sound of your breathing remains, and the soft promise of dreams waiting to unfold. Now, as the moon rises above the hills and the night deepens, let us begin tonight's story. The Crystal of Buddha. Long, long ago, in a time when cherry blossoms fell like soft snow, and the world moved with the quietness of temple bells, there lived a great state minister named Kamatari. His days were filled with matters of court and kingdom, but his heart, his truest heart, belonged to his only daughter. Her name was Kahaku-jo, and she was beautiful. Not in the way of painted scrolls, but in the way morning light touches water, delicate and true. She moved through the palace gardens like wind through bamboo, her footsteps soft upon the stone paths, her laughter lighter than the song of summer cicadas. Kamatari loved her with the fierce tenderness of autumn rain, and he made a quiet vow in his heart that no man of ordinary station would ever claim her hand. Only a king, he thought, could be worthy of such grace. And so, though many came with offerings, wealthy merchants bearing silk, young warriors with honoured names, Kamatari turned them all away, one by one, like leaves falling from a winter tree. Then, one day, in the warmth of early summer, when the air was thick with the scent of wisteria, a great commotion arose in the palace courtyard. The gates, which had stood peacefully open, now streamed with men bearing banners. Upon the largest banner, worked in threads of shimmering silk, a golden dragon coiled against a field of yellow, its eyes sown with such care that they seemed to watch the world with ancient wisdom. Kamatari came to the gates, his robes flowing behind him like water, and there he learned. These men had journeyed far across the sea. They came from the court of China, from the Emperor Koso himself. The emperor had heard, as wind carries whispers, of Kahaku-jo's exceeding beauty, of her gentle spirit and exquisite charm. And now, having heard these things, he desired to make her his bride. As was the custom in those ancient days, the emperor's offer came with a promise as vast as the Eastern Sea. If Kohaku-jo should become his empress, she might choose from all the treasures of China, whatever her heart desired, to send back to her beloved homeland. Kamatari received the envoys with great ceremony, with tea served in porcelain cups, with bows as precise as folded paper, and he gave them an entire wing of the palace, where they might rest from their long journey. But when the formalities were complete, and the evening settled soft as silk upon the gardens, Kamatari returned to his private chambers. There, in the stillness, he sent for his daughter. Kohaku-jo entered as she always did, with the quiet grace of water finding its path, and she knelt upon the white tatami mats, her hands folded in her lap like sleeping birds, waiting for her father to speak. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but filled with all the unspoken words that fathers and daughters carry in their hearts. At last, Kamatari spoke. He told her of the Emperor of China, of the great honor that had come to their house, and that he had chosen this distant emperor to be her husband. Kohaku-jo, this small and gentle soul, felt her heart suddenly grow heavy. Tears came to her eyes, unbidden as spring rain, and though she tried to hold them back, they fell, soft and silent, upon her folded hands. She had been so happy here, in this palace where she had grown, where every stone knew her footsteps, where every tree had watched her pass from child to woman. And China, distant China, seemed as far away as the moon itself. But her father spoke to her with such kindness, his voice warm as lantern light, telling her of happiness yet to come, of a life more beautiful than she could imagine, of all the treasures of an empire laid at her small feet. And he told her something else, something that brought a flicker of light to her tearful eyes. She would be able to choose 3 treasures from all the wonders of China and send them to the temple of Kofukuji, where she had received a blessing as an infant, where monks had prayed for her long life and happiness. This thought, this small seed of purpose, gave her comfort. She dried her eyes with the sleeve of her kimono, and though her heart still ached, she bowed to her father's wisdom, as a reed bows to the river current. The days that followed moved swiftly, too swiftly for a young woman leaving home. Her companions, the girls who had grown beside her, who had shared secrets in moonlit gardens, who had laughed and wept with her through all the seasons, now wept to hear she would be leaving. But Kohaku's mother, gentle and wise, comforted them with a truth. Some of them would be chosen to accompany their mistress across the sea, to remain by her side in this new and distant life. And so, on a morning when mist clung to the ground and temple bells rang soft across the hills, Kohaku-jo made her way to Kofukuji. The temple stood as it had for countless years, its wooden beams dark with age and rain, its roof tiles covered in moss the colour of jade. She walked the stone path slowly, feeling each step, knowing she might never walk this way again. Inside the temple, incense curled through the air, sweet and heavy, carrying prayers upward like smoke. Kohaku knelt before the sacred shrine, and she prayed, not for herself, but for protection on her journey. And she made a vow, quiet but binding, that if her prayers were answered, if she arrived safely in China, she would search that vast empire for its 3 most precious treasures and send them back to this temple as a thank offering. The sea voyage was long, but Kohaku reached China safely, just as she had prayed. The Emperor Koso, this distant figure, this man she'd never seen, received her with magnificence beyond imagining. There were palaces of white stone, gardens where water flowed in silver streams, courtyards where peacocks spread their impossible colours, and everywhere, the sound of music drifting soft as clouds. But what surprised Kohaku most, what melted her childish fears like snow in sunlight, was the Emperor's kindness. He did not speak to her as a possession, but as a lover speaks to the beloved. One evening, as they walked through a garden of azaleas, the Emperor turned to her and said, his voice quiet with wonder, "After long, long days of weary waiting, I have gathered the azalea of the distant mountain, and now I plant it in my garden, and great is the gladness of my heart." Day by day, palace by palace, the Emperor led Kohaku through his kingdom. She saw halls of carved jade, rooms where silk hung like waterfalls, pavilions that seemed to float above the earth. Each palace was more beautiful than the last, but the Emperor, watching her with gentle eyes, knew she was more beautiful than any of them. And because he loved her, because he desired that her beauty be remembered, not just in his lifetime, but for all the years to come, he called together his finest craftsmen. Goldsmiths came, and gardeners with earth under their fingernails, and together they were given a command, such as had never been heard. They were to fashion a path, unlike any path in all the wide world, where the Empress might walk. And this path would be made of lotus flowers, carved from silver and gold, so that when she walked beneath the trees, beside the lake, in the early morning or the purple evening, her beautiful feet would never touch the earth. And people would say, with wonder in their voices, that she walked only upon lotus blossoms. And from that day forward, in China and in Japan, poets and lovers alike would call the feet of the women they cherished lotus feet. But despite all this magnificence, despite the kindness of her husband and the beauty that surrounded her like music, Kohaku did not forget. She did not forget her homeland, or the mist that rose from Japanese valleys, or the particular way temple bells sounded at dusk. And she did not forget her vow. One morning, when rain fell soft against the windows, she spoke to the Emperor, her voice barely louder than the rain itself, and told him of her promise to Kofukuji. The Emperor, who loved her more each day, was pleased to have another way to bring her joy. He commanded that all the treasures of China be brought before her. And so they came, carried by countless servants, until the great hall overflowed. There were jade carvings that seemed alive with light, paintings on silk that captured wind and moonlight, robes embroidered with gardens of impossible beauty, vessels of porcelain thin as eggshells, and jewels that held the colours of every season. It seemed as if an entire world of beauty had suddenly manifested at her small feet. Kohaku walked among these treasures, her heart overwhelmed, not knowing where to begin. How could she choose from such abundance? She walked slowly, thoughtfully, touching this, considering that, feeling the weight of her decision. For these would be gifts to a sacred place, gifts that would carry her gratitude across the sea, home. At last, after much reflection, she chose 3 treasures. The first was a musical instrument, whose wood was smooth as water, and if one struck it, it would play forever, a melody that needed no hand to continue, a song without end. The second was an inkstone box, carved from dark wood and inlaid with silver, and when one opened the lid, inside would be found an inexhaustible supply of ink, black as midnight, enough to write all the poems in the world. But the third treasure, the last, was the most precious of all. It was a crystal, perfect and clear, like water frozen in the moment of complete stillness. And in its depths, from whichever side you gazed, you would see an image of Buddha, riding upon a white elephant. The jewel shone like a captured star, and whoever looked into its liquid depths, whoever saw the blessed vision within, would know peace of heart forevermore. Kohaku sent for Admiral Banco, a man of proven honour and long service, and entrusted these 3 treasures to his care. He bowed deeply, understanding the weight of his responsibility, and promised to deliver them safely to the temple of Kofukuji. And so Admiral Banco set sail, his ship cutting through blue water, his heart filled with purpose. For many days the journey went well. The sea remained calm, the wind favourable, and Japan grew nearer with each sunrise. But when they entered Japanese waters, when they sailed into the Bay of Shido-no-ura, the sky suddenly darkened. Clouds gathered, black and heavy, like great birds of shadow. And then the storm came. It came with a fury that seemed almost alive. The wind howled like 1,000 demons, and waves rose up, mountains of water, fierce as wild beasts. Lightning split the sky, again and again, illuminating for one terrible moment. The ship flung high upon a crest, or swept down into a valley of green water, from which it seemed it could never rise. The crew clung to ropes and masts, their voices lost in the storm's roar, their prayers swept away by wind. Admiral Banco held fast to the wheel, his face streaming with rain and sea spray, his entire being focused on keeping the ship alive. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the storm ceased. The wind died to nothing. The waves, those terrible mountains, subsided to gentle swells. It was as if some invisible hand had brushed away the clouds and laid a blue and sparkling carpet across the water. The crew stood, exhausted and amazed, hardly daring to believe they had survived. But Admiral Banco, his first thought was not for himself, but for the treasures. He went below, his heart pounding, and there he found the musical instrument, safe, the inkstone box, undamaged. But the crystal, Buddha's precious crystal, was gone. A sound came from the Admiral's throat, a sound of such grief that the crew on deck heard it, and knew that something terrible had happened. For a long moment, Admiral Banco stood frozen, his mind unable to accept what his eyes showed him. He thought of taking his own life, as honour would demand, for he had failed in his sacred duty. But then, as he stood in that dim space, with the ship rocking gently beneath him, another thought came. if there was anything at all, he could do to recover the crystal, would it not be wiser to live and to try? And so he hastened to land, his face grave with sorrow, to inform the Great Minister Kamatari of his dreadful misfortune. When Kamatari heard the news, he did not rage or curse the admiral. Instead, he grew very still, and in that stillness, his wisdom spoke. He knew, with the certainty of long years, that this was no accident. The Dragon King of the sea, who dwelt in palaces of coral beneath the waves, had stolen the crystal. The storm had been his doing, a distraction, so he might take the treasure unperceived. Kamatari went to the shore of Shido-no-ura, where fishermen mended their nets, their hands moving with the practiced ease of those who have done the same work for all their lives. He offered them a great reward, wealth beyond their imagining, if any among them would dive into the sea and bring back Buddha's crystal. The fishermen, brave souls all, did not hesitate. One by one they dove, disappearing beneath the blue surface, staying down until their lungs burned, then rising, gasping, empty-handed. They tried again and again, until exhaustion made their limbs heavy, but the crystal remained beyond their reach, safe in the keeping of the Dragon King. Kamatari stood watching, his heart heavy with despair, when he became aware of a presence beside him. A woman stood there. She was poor, her clothes worn and mended, and in her arms she carried an infant who slept with the perfect peace of the very young. The woman bowed, and in a voice that was quiet but firm as stone, she asked if she might attempt to retrieve the crystal. Kamatari looked at her with surprise. She seemed so frail. This woman with her baby. What chance could she have where strong men had failed? But there was something in her eyes, a certainty, a mother's fierce determination that made him listen. She explained her request. If she succeeded, she asked no wealth for herself, but only this, that Kamatari would raise her son as a samurai. That her boy would not grow to be merely a poor fisherman, but something more, something honoured. And Kamatari, who had once been ambitious for his own daughter's future, who understood a parent's hopes, solemnly promised. If she succeeded in her task, he would raise the boy as his own, and give him every opportunity to become a great man. The woman nodded, and with careful hands she gave her sleeping infant to one of the fishermen's wives. She removed her outer garments and tied a rope around her waist, into which she tucked a sharp knife. Then she turned to face the sea. The fisherman took hold of the rope's end, ready to pull when the signal came. The woman breathed deeply, once, twice, filling her lungs with air. And then she dove. Down she went, through layers of light and shadow, past schools of silverfish that darted away, past rocks covered in swaying kelp. At first, she saw only the dim shapes of the underwater world, the gold of sand far below, the dark shapes of stone. But then, as she swam deeper, something appeared through the murky water. Roofs, many roofs. The palace of the Dragon King, vast and gorgeous, built of coral that glowed with inner light, decorated with forests of coloured seaweed that moved in the current like silk banners. It rose like a great pagoda, tier upon tier, reaching up through the water. The woman swam closer, her lungs beginning to ache, but her resolve unshaken. And then she saw it. At the very pinnacle of the palace, a light shone. Bright, so bright, more brilliant than the moon, than 1,000 moons. It was Buddha's crystal. And surrounding it, on every side, great dragons lay sleeping. Their scales gleamed dully in the dim water, their claws curved like terrible swords, their tails coiled and massive. They slept, but even in sleep, they seemed to watch. The woman's lungs screamed for air, but she pushed upward, toward that shining jewel. Every muscle in her body strained, her vision beginning to narrow, darkness creeping at the edges. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and snatched the crystal from its place. The moment her hand touched the jewel, the dragons woke. Their eyes opened, burning like coals. Their massive claws extended. Their tails lashed the water, creating currents that spun the woman around. They came after her, fast as lightning, their jaws opening to show rows of white teeth. The woman's heart pounded, but her mind was clear. She would not, could not, lose this crystal, not after coming so far, not with her son's future at stake. With one swift movement, she drew the knife from her waist and cut a wound in her left breast. Pain blazed through her, sharp and terrible, but she did not cry out. She could not cry out, for there was no air to make sound. With shaking hands, she pressed the crystal into the bleeding wound, forcing it deep into her own flesh, then held her hand over it, keeping it hidden, keeping it safe. Her blood flowed out, darkening the water, clouding everything around her. And when the dragons saw the blood, when they swam through that dark cloud, they suddenly stopped. For dragons, even mighty sea dragons, fear the sight of blood. They turned back, disappearing into the depths, returning to their palace below. The woman pulled sharply on the rope. Far above, on the surface, the fishermen felt the tug. They hauled with all their strength, hand over hand, faster and faster. Up through the water, the woman rose, consciousness fading, her hand still pressed to her breast, her precious burden safe. They pulled her onto the shore and laid her gently on the sand. Her eyes were closed, her skin pale as moonlight, her breast bleeding freely. Kamatari knelt beside her, his heart sinking, thinking she had given her life in vain. But then, her eyes opened, just a little. She looked up at him, and with trembling fingers, she moved her hand from her breast. From the wound, she drew the crystal. It still shone, bright and pure, untouched by blood or seawater. She pressed it into Kamatari's hand, and her lips moved, forming words almost too soft to hear. "Your promise," she whispered, "my son." Kamatari's hand closed around the crystal, and he nodded, tears in his eyes, understanding. "I will keep my word," he said. "Your son will be raised with honor. He will want for nothing. This I swear." The woman smiled. It was a smile of such peace, such complete serenity, that Kamatari would remember it for all the rest of his days. And then, with that smile still on her lips, she closed her eyes and did not open them again. Kamatari took the woman's infant son, this child who would never remember his mother, and brought him to his own home. He raised the boy with all the care, all the love of a true father. The child wanted for nothing, and as he grew, he learned the ways of the samurai. He learned honor and courage, loyalty and wisdom. In time, he became a man, brave and true, just as his mother had hoped. And when Kamatari grew old, and his time came to pass from the world, this young man, no longer young, took his place as a great state minister. Many years later, when the man learned the full story of his mother's courage, of her sacrifice in the dark waters, he did what honor demanded. He built a temple in the Bay of Shido-no-ura, on the very shore where she had given her life. The temple was called Shidoji. And to this day, pilgrims come to that place. They walk the paths she once walked. They gaze at the sea she once entered, and they remember. They remember a poor shell-gatherer who possessed no wealth, no name, no power, but who possessed something far greater: a mother's love and courage beyond measure. And the crystal, that precious jewel, was delivered at last to the temple of Kofukuji, just as Kohaku-jo had promised. There it remained for countless years, a reminder that vows once made must be kept, no matter the cost. That treasures are not always gold or jade, but sometimes courage, sometimes sacrifice, sometimes love. And now, as the story fades like mist, and the night grows deep and still, we remember these things. The lotus feet of an empress, walking on silver and gold. The terrible beauty of dragons, guarding their treasure beneath the waves. A crystal shining with eternal light. And most of all, a nameless woman who gave everything, so her son might have a future. The wind moves through the pines, soft as breathing. The moon rises over still water. And somewhere, in a temple by the sea, pilgrims light incense and bow their heads and remember. All things pass, like cherry blossoms falling. But kindness, courage, love, these remain. And in the remembering, we find peace. The night deepens. The stars shine quietly above. And rest comes, at last, soft as snow, gentle as silence.